Well, Bitcoin back above 94,000, rising to its highest level in over a month, surpassing its 50-day moving average for the first time since October of last year. Now, the crypto major is coming off a tough end to 2025, and a big question is hanging over the market. Has the historic four-year halving cycle finally run its course, or is this just a pause before another move higher? We're keeping a close eye on institutional flows as well as liquidity. Joining me as 2026 gets underway is John Haar, Managing Director at Swan Bitcoin. John, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Well, first and foremost, we are looking at Bitcoin reclaiming that 94K level, but 2026 has been off to quite a start, not just for crypto, but the broader markets as well. So what is your outlook?
Yeah, so I think for 2026, at least in the first 5-6 days, it seems to be validating the thesis that the Bitcoin thesis itself over the medium and long term is intact. And for 2025, I mean, I will eat some crow sitting in this chair with you. Last year, I had some predictions that were saying we would end the year in the 150 to 200 range. Clearly did not turn out to be true, so I'll eat some crow there. I am of the belief that it's easier to predict 5 years from now than it is to predict 5 months from now. So short-term price predictions is always a tough game. But all the trends that have let Bitcoin become roughly a $2 trillion asset, monetary expansion, increasing liquidity, increasing adoption, they're all intact. So I expect, absent some sort of black swan event in 2026, I expect Bitcoin to be supported by all those trends. So we'll see, but I'll make my prediction. I'll just say I was 1 year early. We'll end 2026 in the 150 to 200K range.
Yeah, but John, you bring up an important point that you can forecast easily or easier looking 5 years ahead as opposed to just looking at the year ahead. So tell us about your take when it comes to cycles for Bitcoin and the conditions. What's the same? What's different now?
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest questions that all Bitcoin investors or investment analysts are facing, is this idea of what cycles has Bitcoin been reacting to, affected by in the past, and what cycles will it be going forward. Historically speaking, Bitcoin, I think, has been affected by this idea of a 4-year calendar halving cycle. It makes sense that that would play a bigger role in Bitcoin's earlier history, especially when the Bitcoin miners played a bigger role in terms of how much was being mined or issued. Also, they were the biggest holders of Bitcoin, so there kind of was this 4-year calendar halving cycle. But as time goes on, I think that part of that influence becomes much less. And then I think it becomes more about macro cycles. What is the Fed doing? What's the economy doing? What are liquidity conditions? So I think that's what's going to drive Bitcoin going forward, and it's not going to be this 4-year calendar halving cycle. I would argue that we've already seen the 4-year calendar halving cycle not apply anymore. I think what will be the nail in the coffin for it is if Bitcoin hits an all-time high in 2026, then I think you can't make the case that there's this 4-year halving cycle anymore, because 2025 was a flat year, down 5-6% officially, call it flat. And then if 2026 sees a new all-time high, then that pattern is just broken. So I think that'll be one of the biggest stories of 2026 for Bitcoin.
Yeah, and as we head into this year, there's a lot we're keeping our eyes on, especially when it comes to the regulatory landscape. But of course, institutional adoption, you and I are sitting here at the New York Stock Exchange, and we continue to hear from the big banks and their plays getting into the digital asset space. So how is this affecting Bitcoin and how it trades this year?
Yeah, so I think institutional adoption, one of the biggest stories. Of course, there's individual people adopting Bitcoin, retail, high net worth individuals, that's always happening, but institutional adoption gets a lot of headlines, as it should. So I think some big ones to highlight would be Harvard, $50 billion Ivy League endowment. Their largest publicly reportable position is Bitcoin. Bank of America Merrill Lynch recently said they would support a 1 to 4% allocation to Bitcoin and crypto. Vanguard just recently said, hey, our clients, that's over 10 trillion in assets, they now have access to the Bitcoin ETFs. And just this morning, Morgan Stanley filed paperwork so that they could have their own Bitcoin ETF. So I think the trend is pretty clear here, is that institutions are adopting Bitcoin. It's just becoming further entrenched and legitimate in the eyes of institutional players.
And finally, John, before I let you go, in the aftermath of October 2025, we've been keeping a close eye on technical levels, at least when it comes to Bitcoin. So do you think investors out there, whether we're talking retail or institutional, should they be focusing on technical levels, or do you think big picture predictions matter more?
Personally, I think the big picture predictions matter. The example I would love to give to people is look at some of the most successful investments of all time, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, whatever. Could you play the short-term trader game and try to trade all the ups and downs? Sure, you can. I think most people will not be successful doing that. So if you're a professional short-term trader, I'd say go for it. If you're looking to save your wealth in an asset that I think will do very, very well over 3, 5, 10 years, then I think ignore the short-term moves, just look at the long-term thesis, and you'll be rewarded for that.
And before I let you go, we have about 60 seconds here. So, of course, we're keeping our eyes on the nation's capital for many reasons as we head into 2026. But when it comes to the regulatory landscape for digital assets, what are you watching?
Yeah, so I think Bitcoin largely has most regulatory clarity that it could want. I don't think there's some big item that needs to happen that Bitcoin is particularly waiting for. But if we do get some sort of clarity act, as they're calling it, like a market structure act, I think that would be good for some of the other digital assets that are awaiting that clarity. Mm-hmm. But again, and maybe it's like tangentially related to Bitcoin, because if the digital asset space as a whole gets more clarity, and any investors that are waiting on the sidelines to say, hey, I'm still not sure how Washington, D.C. is going to treat this asset class, it's just one more brick in the wall of saying, okay, digital assets are here to stay. We have more regulatory clarity. So I think overall it would be positive for the space. But again, I don't view it as a major, major story for Bitcoin in 2026.
Okay, John, always great talking to you. Thank you so much for joining me as we kick off the new year.
Thanks, Ernie.
Thank you.